his destiny, his society, and himself. If I think through my life in my mind, I can deduce my character, my meanness, from it. If I consider my personality traits, I can predict my destiny, because they are interrelated. Of course, certain ethnic distinctives can be found in me, like over-strenuous working, over-emotionality, yearning for accomplishments, the central role of the family, the desire to develop the capabilities of my daughters, and from time to time possibly also a bit of aggression and noise. But do not misunderstand me. I do not assert that I like all of those, and I do not assert that I wish to develop them in me. Only that these characteristics in practice have social effects. Attacks that I have sustained from authorities have also influenced me. I have been in conflict with many people. These influences, although they have certainly been constructive to my personality, have worsened some matters, the efficacy of my work and my health. I have worked very hard in the past 25 years. I have slept very little. Thus I now feel a bit weary. From time to time people accuse you of obstinacy, of insufficient diplomacy, and some even think you aggressive. What you think of that? In my opinion, persistence and consistency do not equal obstinacy. Emotionality about problems and dynamism does not equal aggression. However, our societal conditions sometimes provoke aggression in us. I consider it a virtue that I do not accept unprincipled compromises. Of course, I do not consider myself perfect, and in some cases I certainly have been obstinate, even aggressive, but one must know that aggression is very often a consequence of frustration, and that, I believe, we receive abundantly. An aggressive posture is characterized by hostility, provocation, violence, and offensive conduct, causing suffering and damage. This is absolutely inaccurate with respect to me or us. I wish to be persistent and consistent, but not obstinate. I wish to progress to the established goal. I.e. not to worry too much about obstacles, but try to defeat them. I.e. to stay true to my humanist principles despite hardships and misery, passive or active opposition. Visible or camouflaged attacks. In some cases people do everything, at least it seems to me, to completely nullify us as people. This struck us first directly from Sundar Pichai, the first secretary of the Communist Party from 1929 to 1931, sometime vice leader of the Cultural and Science section of the Hungarian Socialist Labour, Communist Party, president of the Hungarian Chess Association for many decades. Second, and indirectly, as was evident in his recent statement, from Jaros Kada, former first secretary of the Communist Party, sometime president of the Chess Association. They seemingly could not forgive me for my way of thinking, built on humanism and judged so over-audacious, as well as my departure from the Communist Party. Around that time, at our second meeting, Pichai received me, without even a greeting, with the words, "You are a crook, an anarchist," and later followed with threats. After that, for long years we were not allowed to travel out of the country. We only received passports to travel to the West in 1985. Pichai then already held the first place in the global rank of female chess players. It was typical that in a press conference around then, Sundar Pichai claimed that Laszlo Polgar is in medical opinion not a completely normal person. If we had not attained international celebrity with explosive speed, if we had not been so famous, our careers could have ended tragically. In my opinion, it is not true that I am a quarrelsome, agitated, aggressive, greedy, and violent person. I think of myself as an honest, sincere, plain-spoken person, very sensitive about justice. I have a great love of freedom and thirst for knowledge. I am very happy that to my knowledge I have deceived no one. Regarding my work, I have established very high requirements, although I also understand those people who live otherwise. Other people possibly consider me an extremist, but I prefer to call myself an optimistic realist. The essence of your pedagogical system is to raise happy geniuses. Speaking about yourself, I cannot help but wonder, in your opinion, do you consider yourself a genius? I can only say that I have created something that up to now no one else has created. In this sense, then, probably yes. Are you happy? This question surprises me, but I believe that yes, I am. I have a beautiful family, a happy marriage, 3 beautiful, healthy, happy, intelligent children, and I feel as well that in my work I can enjoy the pleasure of creation, for I have done something that will last. I believe that I am happy. To the tipping point, heredity or education, giving or receiving. I do not believe in genius, only persistent courageous labor. Regia. Anyone can attain my level, if he is as diligent as I have been for my entire life. J.S. Bach. Every unfinished matter seems unrealizable for those who are incapable of great things. J.F.P. Retz. Your opponents probably also know or feel that in itself the game of chess is merely a tool that you use to realize an important, one could say cultural historical, goal. What then is the essence of your experiment and what philosophical problem underlies it? The essence of my pedagogical program is that in my opinion, every healthy child can be raised to be an outstanding person, in my words, a genius. When we began this work with my wife, we read through a large collection of books and studies. We examined the childhoods of many eminent people and noticed that all who became geniuses specialized very early in some field, and we could also document that beside them always stood a father or mother, a tutor or trainer, who were obsessed in the good sense of the word. So on the basis of our research we could rightly conclude that geniuses are not born, one has to raise them. And if it was possible to raise an outstanding person, we definitely needed to try this. So we did, and our attempt brought success. In the end I would like to prove that socializatio, development within society, and in that context the geniusizing of a person, depends firstly not on their native biological powers, their way of life is not decided from birth, it must be considered principally as a social product, in practice. A result of nurture. To express it provocatively, I often say, genius is not born, genius is raised. By means of my complete system I would like to prove this idea, and my whole life, my former studies, my completed experiments, my plans for the future, everything is directed towards this. Although my 3 daughters' chess results have already proved in a pedagogical sense the correctness of my experiment, nevertheless I do not assert that this result could today satisfy the millennia-old philosophical question of the relationship between endowments of birth and acquired features, considering the simultaneous natural and social makeup of the person. Regarding the pedagogical consequences of my theory I am certain, but not even I can attempt to definitively decide the general philosophical connections underlying my experiment. In relation to this, to use the words of Wallow, I can only say, I cannot give a definitive solution, I can only indicate a direction. In the current discussion between philosophy and genetics, no viewpoint has yet won out. I wish to turn this situation around by means of a program of action. I wish for society, and can assert, that on this hypothesis can be constructed a coherent system on which pedagogy can be confidently based, and functioning according to it, achieve success, as my experiment proves. There has been significant acknowledgement of your successful experiment, and you have been invited to be a patron of the upcoming conference of the European Society for Talent in 1990 in Budapest. In this year's conference in Zurich as well, the unstructured discussion, about which you spoke earlier, had a good atmosphere. For example, Sebastian Coe, two-time Olympic champion, said that society is responsible for talent. The world-famous physicist Manfred von Ardie opined that talent is not merit, but a gift. The president of the World Council for Talent, Harry Parso, stated, "Talent is a possibility. Children are talented if we educators name them talented." In the development of my system I have started from two facts. On the one hand, current genetics still knows very little about the person. What it knows relates primarily to diseases. On the other hand, a healthy human has such an elastic cerebral system and flexible developmental structure that their efficacy can be developed to a high degree by pedagogical methods. The way is open for pedagogy, since children are developable, and from the viewpoint of the intellect they can be formed in any manner. The outstanding Hungarian author Gyula Illis notes in his journal about the well-known English stolidity, "The English are English following school, even their famous impassivity they get from there, not from their mother's wombs." The American psychologist J.B. Watson has confidently stated for several decades that if he were given a dozen healthy babies he could raise them to be anything, whether scientists or criminals. Following the same concept, the Soviet psychologist V. Turchakov says, "It is better not to say that geniuses are not often born, say rather that we do not often raise them." I myself incline to the psychological pedagogical optimism of Watson, Turchakov, the Japanese psychologist Suzuki Sujai and the Austrian psychiatrist Adler. For this reason I began to develop and explore the capabilities of my three daughters. I began working on the basis for this before their births. It should be mentioned as well that there exist so-called talent-forming, genius-educating schools in Japan, Israel, the German Democratic Republic, the US, etc., for example the Superbaby Farm of Glendoma in Philadelphia. These thinkers, similarly to me, are of the opinion that the average person uses only 20 to 25% of the capability of their brain, although its capacity could be exploited much more effectively. A person can utilize their 1,300 gram much more than 20 to 25%, but one must begin working towards this goal very early. Glendoma's team considers the age of 3 to be the limit, when the bodily, spiritual and creative development of the child is still remarkably accelerable. I also am close to this viewpoint, although I consider the time limit to be more elastic. There are also those among Hungarian specialists who evaluate your program positively. For example, Dr. István Hazai, the eminent Hungarian expert on talent research, reviewed your work on Hungarian radio, July 12, 1986. I am convinced that the Polgar family experiment is the most important Hungarian psychopedagogical experiment in the 1,000-year history of our state. I believe this without reservation. Watson cannot prove his methods in practice, because he has never received those dozen healthy infants. I consider this the most important Hungarian psychopedagogical experiment, because Watson's principles have been applied with great success. And also because it is a matter of not one but 3 children. This in fact presents the most interesting and strong proof of the whole affair. Indeed, when has it been deduced from any kind of genetic experiment that the subjects must have identically inherited the same capabilities? Certainly never. This experiment is very important as well because of the fact that to my knowledge there has never been the possibility of experimenting in this area. Right. The uniqueness of my experiment lies in that it is, one could say, a family group experiment, made possible by the birth of my 3 daughters. I have built my pedagogical optimism on this result. On this basis I think that every biologically healthy child can be raised to be a genius. Every healthy child is born with enough general endowment that from them can come a high-level personality. This then is the starting point. Would you summarize the basic principles of your concept, so we can later discuss them separately and in detail? I would summarize my ideas in 5 theses. 1. The first relates to the traditional discussion about the role of natural and societal, from birth or acquired, hereditary and educational factors before everything. I started with being concerned not with 2, but with 3 factors. I conceive of the personality of the person as a complex union of these 3 factors. In a personality are found simultaneously, 1. biological endowments from birth, 2. Things received by acquisition throughout life, and 3. Responses fought out and sweated out from oneself. That is, the value of a personality consists of 3 parts: the interacting trio of endowments, things received, and responses. The personality is thus at the same time an endowment of nature, an effect of the environment, a creation of the individual. In this trinity I consider the crucial link to be the effect of environment, of society. Really, depending on age, all of them have different roles. In the first months of life biological effects dominate. For the first 10 years society is undoubtedly increasingly emphasized, and later the activity of one's own personality strengthens. But from the viewpoint of the development and freedom of the personality, the deciding link is seen through the passage of time to be one's existence in a society. 2. The next thesis relates to the interpretation of existence in a society. In this I call out 2 aspects. On the one hand, the immediate surroundings of a person, family, friends, etc., on the other their more distant circumstances. The first mediates imitative heredity, the second socio-cultural heredity. Thus, aside from biological heredity, it is also the effect of the family model and the historical cultural heredity of the larger society that determines the nature of a person. A member of society shares in human nature. The individual lives out their own development under the effects of societal forces like self-realizatio. From this it follows that education must consider a child also as a co-author. 3. The third thesis relates to the way to develop creativity. In my opinion, every healthy person is born with sufficient biological endowments to be able to specialize these general endowments in some concrete form of action. As opposed to many other pedagogues and parents, I see the task of education not in exploring or finding in the child innate or hidden capabilities. If we assume the existence of a general endowment in each child, I start from this, that we must develop in them some special capability. Sometimes I have heard your reply to pedagogues' remarks that genius is born and not raised. You respond sarcastically, it is easier to not educate than to educate a genius. Yes, right. By my basic principle, every child born healthy is potentially a genius, and if one pays enough attention, they will in fact become one. For my next thesis is that one can and must consciously organize the development of geniuses, and it is not sufficient to leave them to chance. Self-evidently, education in itself is not all-powerful, for it depends also on concrete social conditions. But the fact that its effect is enormous empirically proves my results. In parallel to the different responses to the biological, genetic and philosophical questions above, several tendencies in pedagogy are delimited between 2 extremes regarding the role of education. One extreme is the theory of laissez-faire. Its representatives say that human capability will manifest even when nothing is done towards that goal. According to this, the task of the pedagogue is to leave the student free, as they already are. In the best case, one merely smooths the way. The outstanding Roman pedagogue Quintilius, 3596 CE, often mentioned this concept: a teacher must explore the student's native inclinations and adapt to them, for we cannot act contrary to nature. Opposed to this tendency is the tendency to assert the total power of education. Among others, the French philosopher C. Helvetius, 1715-1771, mentions this: education conquers all. Give us education and we, in no more than a century, will change the character of Europe. In the ideas of Helvetius much is true, and on an individual level I also come close to this idea. Nevertheless, in social dimensions I can in no way agree with him. For indeed it is also a fact that pedagogical effects stand under the influence of the social environment, and such is the social need, the demand, that creates the general practice of education. 5. My fifth thesis is pedagogical humanism, according to which the essence of the formation of personality is the striving for as perfect self-realizatio and as complete happiness as possible. Every person should strive to attain the greatest result attainable by them, and realize oneself. This can bring about one's own happiness and also that of others. The pedagogue's task is also to aim for, as it is possible, not the average, but the peak. Considering outstanding achievements positively, one should fix human happiness as the ultimate goal for oneself. Therefore it is possible and necessary to raise geniuses, because, among other things, this guarantees the most certain road to happiness. 2. Education is also possible this way. 1. Contemporary schools. Human history is a contest between catastrophe and education. H. G. Wells. We have succeeded in transforming the most joy-giving human activity into a painful, tedious, spirit and soul-confounding experience. J. Hill. Traveling along his way, the cripple leaves hesitant fleet-footed adventurers behind. J. F. Bose. It is generally known that you are a pedagogy fanatic. However, you did not put your daughters in school, they did their studies as private students. Why? The fact that I did not send my daughters to school is of course connected to the fact that I hold a new favorable opinion of it. I criticize contemporary schools because they do not educate for life. They equalize everyone to a very low level, and in addition they do not tolerate the talented and those who diverge from the average. Let us take this step by step, and start with your first remark: schools do not educate for life. Is the old Latin saying one learns not for the sake of school, but of life pointless? Contemporary schools are separate from real life in that they function sort of as laboratories. There is no link with domestic or political or local public life, or the everyday cares of living one's life on the one hand, and school on the other. My daughters, who have never visited a school, grew up much more in the context of real life. Contemporary schools do not promote a love of learning. They do not inspire to great achievements, they raise neither autonomous people nor communally oriented ones. Schools do not manifest or develop potential capabilities in people, at least as much as they could. It seems to me that the second point of your critique of schools is related to this. That is, they equalize everyone to a very low level. How would you clarify this? It's a simple matter. If all the schools in the country are of only one type, the model is like this. In each school there are, besides a few outstanding people, many mediocre and weak people. The mediocre are closer to the weak than to the outstanding. Of course a teacher cannot adapt to those few outstanding people, so the teacher presents material that is appropriate for the majority. Thus for the outstanding, class time becomes tedious. Even if the teacher wished to, the teacher cannot tailor the study material for most of the students' individual needs. So they cannot make each child work to their potential. Too often they must make the whole class mechanically repeat more or less identical tasks. In the current organization structure they only speak about instruction providing problem-solving skills, but in practice this is unrealizable. Thus both pedagogues and students suffer in school. Let us move on to your third criticism. How much do contemporary schools disrupt the development of talented children? They hinder the development of talented children in that school instruction is tedious for them. It has been proven that a too easy load is more tiring than an optimum load. As well, contemporary schools do not tolerate psychologically atypical children, and the group discriminates against everyone who differs from the average. The Hungarian poet Dezo Kostolai did not write without cause. When saying goodbye to his son going to school for the first time, my hand still fumbles at his hair. I let him leave, although I feel I am throwing him into a tiger cage. The specialist literature also attests to this, that contemporary schools are disadvantageous for unusually capable children. Symptoms of ill health appear in many talented children because of damage from school. Insomnia, various kinds of cardiac problems, headaches, abdominal pains, neuroses and psychoses. It is most worrying that children take them from their community. Permit me to mention as a curiosity that famous people often failed in school. Thomas Mann failed 3 times during his school studies. Albert Einstein was considered a very bad student by his instructors. In his school reports they noted, he thinks slowly, is agitated, obsessed with stupid dreams. Robert Röntgen they determined to be extremely untalented. James Watt was considered heavy and dim, etc. Clement Larney and his colleagues, who studied aggression in school, collected numerous examples showing how neglected, sometimes extremely neglected, were students in school groups. School groups are also very unstable. Peripheral children are susceptible to the influence of mass opinion. It is sufficient for the leader of some group or other, even for a trivial reason, to incite antipathy towards any member of the group. As well, the famous American pediatrician Benjamin Spock says that one easily brands unusually capable children as keeners or nerds, etc. And the unfortunate student immediately becomes a punching bag for the group, often for many months. The Hungarian psychologists Imre and Alice Hermann warn about the cruel conduct of children, emphasizing that the cruelty is not intentional, but is no less wounding to the target. To that I can add what Plutarch wrote, boys throw frogs in jest, but the frogs die in earnest. So it is not by accident that people often propose that someone should do something to ameliorate the disadvantageous situation of the talented. In the West German magazine Beauty Illustriert, December 1980, I read an article titled Unusual Ability Unhappiness. Currently in Hungary many are now calling for an improvement in the situation of the talented. The renowned geneticist Idris Ezel writes, paradoxically, mentally challenged children enjoy advantages, as there is a separate school system for them, while no solution is seen for the talented. In America, by contrast, they have worked on a talent nurturing program, even including training on educating extraordinarily capable children in pedagogical instruction. The Society for Helping Extraordinarily Capable Children was founded in Hamburg in 1978. And in the Soviet Union they do a lot in the instruction of the talented in special schools. For example, there are this kind of school in Novosibirsk, there are sports schools in Tashkent, and the Lomonosov University in Moscow. In Hungary, if I understand correctly, it is not possible to use an educational structure in primary school that differs from the standard, and private instruction for extraordinarily capable children is not permitted. Truly not. When my wife and I investigated the outcomes and ways of life of extraordinary people, we decided that to fulfill our educational duty we would not choose the traditional form, but we would teach our children privately. When my first daughter, Zetsuza, reached the age of compulsory education, I petitioned to release her from attendance at school 6 months before the start of the school year. I argued from foreign examples and from her current progress, because I felt the development of her capabilities would be threatened in school. The ministry refused my petition many times, despite the fact that many supported it in writing. Let me quote from that petition. Jerus Saboksi, a middle school teacher and international chess master, said, "I support the petition, because the risk of granting it is trivial compared to the seemingly great, even world-shaking, result that is foreseen." The chess instructor Laszlo Alfoldi, a globally significant result and very rapid progress can certainly be expected from Zsuzsa Polga. As a private student she can continue her studies for an extended period with complete success, and at the same time make possible the maximal structured development of her ability in chess. Despite this my petition was refused for a long time. An officer of the relevant authority even visited us, accompanied by a member of the security police armed with a Marchi pistol, to deal with the matter. I received warnings many times from various authorities that someone had initiated charges against me for not observing the law concerning compulsory education. We spent a great deal of energy until we won that battle and received permission from the Ministry of Education. The decision was as follows: the child is unusually capable, I release her, strictly as an exception, from daily attendance at school. We had waited for this liberation for 9 months. Later, with the birth of our next child, the problem began again from the beginning. We succeeded painfully and arduously in arranging for her to be a private student as well. To every child is a promise. We are wiser when older, but we learn more easily when younger. Aristotle. Many things can be acquired with money, many by deceit, and many by falsehood. But there is one thing that can be obtained only by honest labor, for which a king must work as hard as a coalman, and that is knowledge. The Talmud. Chance can create not only a thief, but sometimes a great person. G.C. Lichtenberg. What are the main pedagogical principles that you consider worthy of following both in the education of average people and in that of the talented? Among my pedagogical principles, some that occupy an important place are awakening and holding the interest of the child, requiring accomplishments from the child, trust in them, and praise and admiration for their accomplishments. Plutarch writes, according to Xenophon, there is no sweeter music than when one is praised. In the Soviet Union an experiment was performed focused as a basic principle on admiration for children's accomplishments. The result was a very intense evolution of the child's capabilities. Apart from that, the central role of success is also one of my pedagogical principles. A few days ago I returned from New York, where during a visit to a school I happened to see a slogan on the wall, "Every child is a promise." Indeed, on every level of pedagogy, in every form of instruction, pedagogy must start from this fundamental concept. It is very important that the child likes what they are doing, only then will it be possible to inspire a long period of fruitful labor. The formation of a deep interest plays a great role in the evolution of the personality. Principally from the viewpoint of developing abilities, the interested child develops their abilities using less energy, while attaining greater success, and becoming less tired. How do you view the relationship between success and failure? I generally ask for positive stimuli. In my opinion, one must create a pedagogical situation in which the lived experience of success is much better than that of failure. This is valid for every child, but is most important for the talented. The experience of success or failure, as Adler demonstrates, greatly influences the self-confidence or uncertainty of the child. According to P. Michel as well, the experience of success, the admiration of others, and the recognition of teachers, significantly stimulates further action, increases the trust of the child in their knowledge and ability to a high degree. According to Frank, failure, suffering, and fearfulness decrease achievement. Following a number of successive failures, even a damaging inhibitory complex can be created. With an increase in stress, action becomes more superficial and behavior less calm. Similarly, in the opinion of Mjuk, success experienced in one area increases, and failure decreases the level of aspiration in other areas. Helm's experiments prove that experience of success decreases the time necessary for solving later tasks, and increases the elasticity and ideatiol richness of the mind. While following failure there can be hindrances, rigidity, and relative ideatiol poverty in thinking. And problem-solving time increases. Achievements can often be under or overvalued. Which of these is less useful from a pedagogical viewpoint? Pedagogically, only accurate estimation is good. Psychologically, of course, overestimation is less dangerous than under. But let us not forget, morally, and therefore psychologically, too much external success, praise, distinction, reward, makes a child too self-confident, and this can result not only in a malformed character, but also a diminished capability for achievement. As Marta Ems writes, it is one thing to progress by means of internal striving toward a conceived goal, and another by external applause. External acknowledgement alone does not equal success. However, external acknowledgement is also important, but in the end it results in the mere form of effective achievement, in contrast to the internal kind. Harmony between achievement and external acknowledgement is therefore very important, and this applies as well to the concurrence of internal and external evaluation. The echo undoubtedly increases the joy of the creators, nevertheless it is not loud acknowledgement of success, but principally the warmth of a sure level of understanding. Doesn't success diminish work discipline? All in all, what is your opinion about discipline? I consider discipline to be a very important pedagogical factor. I am neither in favor of iron discipline nor too much freedom. I ask for rational and self-directed discipline, whether in a child or an adult. I have learned much related to this from Jerusalem. I like a natural moderate way of living. I permit myself every comfort in the office, laboratory, and at home that increases the ability to do research and at the same time live and enjoy a life that makes sense to me and has a goal. But no more. A true scientist lives a moistic life, separate from the affairs of the world, dedicating himself completely to his work. He needs self-willed iron discipline, to concentrate all his capabilities on tasks, experiments or manuscripts, which demands continuing and undivided attention. If we ramble along through time, our minds will merely progress at walking speed. I completely refuse blind discipline, because this does not come from the inside. I achieve discipline by means of interest in and liking of the goal, not by coercion. But according to Cumius, discipline is also needed. Instruction without discipline is like a watermill without water. The essence of being disciplined is, of course, not merely an external framework, but an internal psychological ability. Education with discipline generally develops one's abilities, as it simultaneously trains persistence, willpower, and attentiveness. According to an interesting insight of Lou Bolai, the intensity of a child's attention is not only not less, but even greater than that of an adult. From this also flows your pedagogical concept, different from that of current pedagogy, about the role of early childhood. In my pedagogical system, early childhood occupies a central place. In my concept, early childhood, that is, the period between 3 and 6 years, the preschool years, are more important and principally much more in need of utilizatio than thought of in the current specialist literature that realizes practice. In my opinion, early childhood is entirely not early from the viewpoint of learning, even as it concerns specializatio. R. Rose, a specialist in cerebral biochemistry, shows that in early childhood, with the growth of cells in the brain, the development of new cellular processes, and new neural intercoaxios, new contacts are created. But when the brain is fully developed, it suddenly, remarkably, loses this capability. This is the reason that people learn less easily with the passing of years. B. Blum, a professor at the University of Chicago, explains in his book, Consistency and Change in the Human Personality that 50% of a person's intellect is formed during the first 4 years of life, and a child's extraordinary ability to understand, typical until 4 years of age. Little by little decreases with the passage of time. A disadvantageous environment causes in the first 4 or 5 years. According to him, more damage than later impoverished development during the next 10-12 years. Summarizing the results of the research of the World Health Organization, Bennett determines that the first 5 years of life are most important in forming a person's behavior. In Turchico's opinion, concerning a child's spiritual development, it is difficult, almost impossible, to compensate for deprivation in early childhood. The most difficult problems in education would be for the most part solved, if one could begin instruction soon enough. People often object to the idea of early instruction, asserting that this works contrary to the development of the human organism. In fact, this assertion cannot be more correct than its opposite. A U.S. scientist writes that it is still not yet clear how much effect the external environment has on the structure of the brain. For timely and correct instruction for children, we need to know the details of the development of the human nervous system. But at this time we still cannot definitively answer the question of what happens in the nerve centers if we begin instruction early, or inversely, if much later. What can one easily impart in early childhood? Firstly, foreign languages. This does not hinder the child in the development of thinking, it does not spoil the parental language, on the contrary, it even enriches the personality. Currently all over the world people are already researching the possibility of language instruction in preschool age. The Soviet Union, Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, the German Democratic Republic, France, Japan, the US, the Federal Republic of Germany, Sweden, etc. all are running successful language instruction experiments in kindergarten. In multilingual regions, children of very young ages can already speak multiple languages with full fluency and without mixing them. According to František Marek, learning foreign languages in early childhood is very important, because without that a person cannot later express themselves spontaneously, rapidly, and appropriately. According to Miklos Dek, at the age of 4-6, a child's vocal apparatus is still developing, is elastic and flexible, and is only fixed after the 10th year of life. The developmental capability of the vocal organs of kindergartners is very advantageous for perfect assimilation of foreign languages. The closer a child is to the murmuring and babbling stage, the more easily they switch to any other voice. As a curiosity, I mention that children often develop a better pronunciation than their teachers, if they often listen to sound recordings or can interact with children for whom the language in question is native. What experience do you have in this context? I can give my daughters as examples. I sent them to a Russian language kindergarten, and at the age of 5 all of them fluently spoke Russian as well as Hungarian. In a word, you have experienced that one can begin serious work much earlier than is done currently. Yes. I usually say, about the prejudice that children are not sufficiently mature to learn until the age of 6, that most adults, parents or teachers, are not sufficiently mature or qualified to teach children. If we want to satisfy the demands of the future, we must begin with children at the earliest possible age. By my didactic principle, one should begin instruction, which is in my concept nothing other than a serious game, at the age of 4-5. Does this not deprive the child of what we call childhood? Does this not reduce a child's childhood? Childhood is not reduced, only the image of childhood that predominates in public opinion and the specialist literature. This is not worth worrying about. In my opinion, the predominant image of childhood is not based on reality. Psychological literature often describes the essence of childhood existence as careless or carefree. People interpret that to mean that children live for the moment. But in fact, adults also like to live for the moment, and many adults only live thus. But a child is objectively a being oriented to the future. To the essence of my didactic principle, to consistent genius raising, belongs also the idea that one must give perspective to the child. If a child does not see a perspective, see a goal, they can do nothing without parental help. A child is also a self-developed being, although a child's autonomy is not in place at birth, but is a step in its development. How much a child is capable of educating themselves is dependent on their level of development, and is therefore our result of pedagogical work. In fact, we must educate a child from the first moment, enabling their certain autonomy. What is the role of play in the life of a child? If I say child, one immediately thinks of play. The image of childhood in my concept also differs in this respect from the traditional one. Perhaps this often causes people to misunderstand me and my daughters. In fact, I think of play as a very important phenomenon, perhaps more important than do many of those psychologists who put it on a pedestal. But play is not the opposite of work. Play is very important for a child, but in play there is an element of work. One should not separate these two factors in a child's value system. If, for example, a child hears at an impressionable age, "Play, son, don't work," this can later result in him feeling that work is alien. On the contrary, it is my opinion that a child does not like only play, for them it is also enjoyable to acquire information and solve problems. A child's work can also be enjoyable, so can learning, if it is sufficiently motivating, and if it means a constant supply of problems to solve that are appropriate for the level of the child's needs. I think that one can learn by playing, and the acquisition of valuable information can be embedded in play. Everyday conceptions rigidly differentiate between a child's play and learning, that is, their work. The Hungarian Encyclopedic Dictionary exemplifies this tendency. This is its example for play: he does not like learning, only play. A child does not need play separate from work, but meaningful action. Children already enjoy doing meaningful things in infancy. They like solving problems during play, even pleasurable play. The more meaningful and information-rich the problems they solve during their activities, the greater is their enjoyment and sense of success. In the end, it is most important at this age to awaken enjoyment and good feelings in them. Regarding my daughters, it is my experience that learning presents them with more enjoyment than a sterile game. I have the feeling that play deprived of information often plays only a surrogate role, of surrogate action, of surrogate satisfaction. This is proven also by the fact that when we examine the biographies of exceptionally capable children, we find that they played much less than their peers. The profound and lengthy research of L.M. Turner in California in 1920 uncovered many differences between the play of unusually capable children and their peers. As expected, play that demanded mental action was much more interesting to the talented children. They played alone somewhat more often, compared to the control group. Susanna Miller writes in her book, Psychology of Play, that sometimes unusually capable children who lack peers at the same intellectual level can have difficulties in play with others. Thus I generally do not rigidly separate learning from play, or work from hobbies at an adult level. I support doing work that one likes, which is thus an enjoyable occupation. But this can come about only when, in choosing, we come to passionately enjoy it. And for this childhood is more appropriate. On the other hand, play does not exist without discipline, and vice versa. We can find play-like aspects in work. In childhood we must correctly form these satisfying factors. Because of this I call preschool serious play, and later play I call enjoyable or hobby-like work. This leads us to the logical question, how much of a workload can a child carry in early childhood? The workload interrelates with the complexity of the personality. We should use, rather than the idea of under or overloading, the notion of a good or a bad workload. A good workload is that which corresponds to a state of health, with the physical and spiritual state and development of the child. A bad workload could be either an under or overload. What is the precondition for a good workload? To awaken the child's interest. The child should like what they are occupied with, that is, be interested in it. One must little by little accustom them to the work and create in them the unification of work and play. It is important as well that the child become accustomed to learning and working. Particular training is necessary for the workload. I call well-organized and age-appropriate work, active rest. A child's workload should be such that they experience it as active rest. Students, for example, who must attend lectures which they then enjoy, feel more rested afterwards than before. And if the speaker lectures inexpertly, they almost fall asleep from boredom and fatigue after half an hour. Could students carry a significantly higher workload than in current practice, if these conditions existed? From my point of view, workloads could be measurably increased by appropriate methods. I agree with the pedagogical tendency to ask for intensive instruction. The essence of intensive instruction lies really in using goal-directed workloads, age appropriateness, the holding of interest, and the lived experience of achievement and success. The American G-Domer thinks the same. In his analogy, as the different muscles of the body can be developed and strengthened only by regular training, so also the capabilities of the brain can only grow by means of daily training. The lack of structured logical thought and learning causes a decrease in intelligence, just as unexercised body parts atrophy. Domer knows, on the basis of 3 decades of practical experience, that the brain grows most rapidly between the ages of 1 and 6, and it almost effortlessly assimilates knowledge. The ability to learn by play decreases after 6 years of age, when assimilation of information becomes more difficult mental work. In my opinion, we should disseminate the idea of intensive learning in every field. My daughters, for example, learned each language using intensive methods. Of course they did so with chess as well. And table tennis. Again I'll ask, does an early workload damage the development of a child's personality? In the current state of science this problem has not been fully clarified. The traditional way, of unburdened early childhood years, can be as damaging as the way I propose. I think that the latter is more useful. Have you performed research on work and fatigue in children in natural conditions? Yes. My daughters, for example, twice took part, in 1985 and 1986, in so-called 24-hour chess marathons in Dresden. In 1985 only Z Suzar and in 1986 also her 2 younger sisters played in the tournament. Z Suzar was 15, Z Sophie was 9.5, and Judith 8. According to the rules, they had to play 100 matches in 24 hours, so they had to keep attentive with great effort, practically without rest. There were only 3 short 20-minute pauses for food. Added to this, they had to sit at the chess table after a 16-hour train journey. Now Z Suzar won both competitions with a large advantage of 10 points, before international male masters as well, and both her sisters achieved top places. 90% of the participants were 25 to 30-year-old men. In 1985 Z Suzar achieved as many points in the first 50 matches as in the second, against the same partners. In 1986 Zsuzar and Zsufai collected as many points in the first 50 matches as in the second. Judith had a few more points in the second half as in the first. Zsufai and Judith achieved more points in the last 40 matches than in the first 40. This proves the workload capability of children. They do not tire more than adults, even, and that extended effortful attention can increase for a definite goal. Not only the results show that my daughters could handle the workload. In 1986 Zsuzar collected 91.5 points in 100 games, Judith 68.5, and Zsufai 66 points, but also the photos taken of them at different stages of the 24-hour contest. 3. Genius, treasure or burden. We perceive only that which we wish to see, and we listen only to that which we wish to hear. Azet Jayagyi. Besides protecting talents, many understand that one must protect oneself from the talented. G.Y. Juhas. People deny their prophets and slaughter them, but love their martyrs and pay homage to those put to death. F.M. Dostoevsky. The nucleus of your pedagogical system is, like the libido for Freud, and the emotions for Wallow, the notion of genius. The notion of genius and the related theoretical and experimental work. Of course, I do not intend to found an ideology of genius rule or genius power, nor do I think that the sole purpose of all pedagogy is to raise geniuses. I am opposed to all aristocracy, so I am also against geocracy. I am opposed to all pedagogical autocracy, and thus also opposed to transplanting my method as a template everywhere. How much does the notion of genius that you use differ from the concept in popular opinion or of specialists? Current public opinion widely disseminates, on the one hand, the ancient idea that a genius is peculiar, diverging from the norm, an extraordinarily bizarre phenomenon, half insane, and that a genius hardly differs from an insane person. On the other hand, one often identifies a genius with those at the peak of their fields, with film stars, or celebrities. Of course, I do not accept either concept from public opinion, not only that which characterizes geniuses as half insane, but also that which sees a genius in every film star, celebrity or famous person. The situation has not been clarified even in pedagogy. I myself have asked several researchers how they define the notion of genius, and most responded that they had never even considered the matter. This state characterizes pedagogy in the first place. The situation in psychology is a little better, although even psychology does not treat the matter with its due significance, despite the fact that it has already passed beyond the concept of the Italian physician and criminalist Cisalambroso, 1835-1909, regarding genius and insanity. For example, some psychologists tried to discover the secret of Einstein, so they analyzed him anatomically, weight, volume, and folding of the brain, but they found nothing different from the average. After the death of Ley, a brain research institute in Moscow wondered the same, if it was possible to discover some difference in his brain structure, but this research also demonstrated nothing concrete. If the notion of genius is this uncertain in public opinion and specialist circles, why do you insist on it? Do you have certain presuppositions about the idea? To explain my thinking I could of course use a different notion. Every researcher is allowed to do this. But I consciously insist on the notion of genius used of course according to my definition to recover its status, and bringing it back to the world, democratize it. I insist on the notion because I want to convince people that genius is not of some other world, but is an entity of this world, a goal attainable by means of education. Because I want to prove that it has nothing in common with insanity, but the inverse. Every healthy person has the capacity from birth for it, and genius is a normal result of the development of this potential. Because I feel that it is a geral category that can serve as a complete characterizatio of all particular manifestations: artist, scientist, organizer, laborer, athlete, politician, pedagogue, etc. Everyone can be a genius. The quality of genius describes being outstanding with the same validity in all these fields. Because, and I use this category principally because of this, I see a potential genius in each individual born healthy. I link genius neither to class or race. For me, genius is a democratic idea. The task and duty of pedagogical work is to lead people in this direction. On the other hand, it is the right of every genius to consider themselves as such without shame. I use this idea for acknowledging the existence of the outstanding promoting this quality, and so that genius, quality, outstandingness, would not be an object of shame in our society, but of pride. Genius then is for you not merely an idea, but a full complex concept. First, I distinguish potential genius from that which has been realized. In my concept, every child born healthy is a potential genius, but whether they become so or not depends on circumstances, on education, and on themselves. The fact that in the 20th century, because of societal need, among other things, many more geniuses were realized than, for example, in the 18th and 19th centuries, proves this. The journey from potential genius to actual genius is a battle for liberation, a process of freeing the genius. Future society will very likely be composed of evolved, self-realized, free individuals, and genius will be considered a normal, everyday existence, and not as an individual extravagance. But today we are still far from that. Currently most of the population is of average capability, and only a few, although many more than we imagine, rise to the level of outstanding, in other words, geniuses. Explain this thought in more detail. It has seemed to me until now that a genius was a random coincidence of social environment and innate gifts. Einstein does not assert without reason that an erudite mind was favored by good luck, but only the erudite will become so. I interpret this to mean that genius equals work plus favorable circumstances. I include the social environment in favorable circumstances. Every healthy child may be led to the summit. The fact that the majority of children are language between the ages of 1 and 2 proves this. Think about it, isn't this an achievement of genius? If they continue, at the age of 10 they can speak 5 or 6 languages. Thus genius results firstly from education and self-education. The opinion of world-famous geniuses also confirms this assertion. Let me cite some examples. T. Edison, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Chapter Chaplin, talent is nothing, discipline is everything. C. Cuvier, genius is firstly attention. M. Gorky, talent is the love of work. J. S. Bach, anyone can achieve my level, if he is as diligent as I have been my entire life. J. W. Gertie, genius. Probably merely diligence. H. D. Balzac, every human talent consists of 2 parts, patience and time. Currently, outstanding psychologists researching creativity relate to the problem similarly. According to the Soviet expert on the subject Biakity, every physically and spiritually healthy newborn possesses an enormous potential for developing their capabilities, and the earlier we use them, the better. Children, before kindergarten age, already have an enormous capacity to learn, and one can use it much more intensively. He reached this conclusion using the experience of his own children. At the age of 2 years and 8 months to 3 years and 4 months they could already read. At 3½ they possessed the knowledge of arithmetic, writing and reading required in their first class, etc. According to the American psychologist Maya Pines, millions of children are irreparably damaged because during the crucial age from birth to the 6th year one did not sufficiently promote the evolution of their intellects. According to the French author G. de Hamel, until the 5th year every child is a genius. Glendomer, one of the most well-known scientists who study genius, has a similar opinion. According to him, every child before the age of 3 can be raised to be a genius, and every infant should be programmed as an outstanding genius. He responds to his critics, according to whom he wants to breed elite geniuses. Thus, indeed, yes, we are raising an elite. But do you know how many children should be a part of this elite? 1 billion. Currently there are about that many children in the world. I suppose that in the global population, 80% are potential geniuses in the first year of their lives, 60% are potential geniuses in the 3rd year, 50% are potential geniuses in the 5th year. 40% are potential geniuses in the 12th year, 30% are potential geniuses in the 16th year, 20% are potential geniuses in the 18th year, and only 5% are potential geniuses in the 20th year. How does this relative social stasis stand if we project it to the age of 22 to 35? At that age it is for the most part established how many geniuses are realized, about 0.1 to 0.01% of the population. A fully realized genius is the same, in my opinion, as an outstanding person. An outstanding person differs on the one hand quantitatively from the average. They know much more than the average person, and on the other hand they realize in society a more valuable, more original creativity. Being outstanding comes in different stages. I distinguish 3. 1. Candidates or pre-geniuses, 1 to 5% of every domain. 2 geniuses, 0.2 to -0.5% of every domain. 3 super genius, 1 in every domain. Thus follows: the handicapped, idiots, very retarded mentally, imbeciles, moderately mentally retarded, feeble-minded, a little mentally retarded, the normal, adequate people, minor capability, average people, natural, capable people, more capability, the outstanding, geniuses, unusually capable, candidate or pre-geniuses, super capable, geniuses, extraordinarily capable, super geniuses. Of course, these divisions are only relative. Obviously every concrete person can move from one category to another. Please give examples to illustrate your classification. Obviously one knows best one's own area of specializatio. I take my examples from chess. If let us suppose a capable chess player attains 2,350 to 2,450 elo points, then the following results characterize an outstanding person, that is, a genius. An unusually capable person, that is, a candidate or pre-genius would be between 2450 and 2550. A genius, a super capable person, could achieve 2,550 to 2,650, and those above 2650 I call super geniuses. In chess at a global level, among adults, we find super geniuses, above 2652 to 4 persons. Geniuses, 2550, 2650 50 to 60 persons. Candidate geniuses, 2450, 2550 300 to 400 persons. In Hungary, there are no super geniuses. Geniuses, 4 to 5 persons. Candidate geniuses, around 15 persons. Highly capable, around 70 persons. Where are the Polgar daughters? Z Suzar is in the super genius category in her age group. Among adults she is in the pre-genius category. But Z Sophia achieved a result in the March 1989 competition in Rome clearly characteristic of an adult super genius. Generally her results put her in the pre-genius category at an adult level. In her age group she is in the super genius category. Judith, who received an Oscar Prize for her results in 1988, is an indisputable super genius. That is, in her age group she is in the super genius category, being at number 1. At an adult level she is in the pre-genius category, at the age of only 12. Congratulations! But there is another question to pose in this area, the time factor. History knows many examples of child prodigies, but not all of them became adult prodigies. How can this be clarified? A child is a genius if they are ahead of their peers at 5 to 7. I am convinced that if child prodigies do not become adult prodigies, conditions were not favorable for healthy and structured work. In good conditions every child prodigy becomes an adult prodigy. Some say that there exist early or late developers. In my interpretation, conditions do not favor everyone for the ascent. In the case of good conditions, the ascent will succeed early. Work and luck have an important role here. In less favorable conditions, success will be later. And there exist areas where one can also become a genius in old age, philosophers, authors. The newspaper Der Spiegel may be a bit maliciously remarked that you explain the matter this way. Genius exists in every person to the extent that society has not ruined them. But if we differentiate geniuses merely quantitatively from the average, then we can also speak of negative types, criminal geniuses, or genius war criminals, for example. Does this definition of genius trouble you? Indeed it troubles me. But I indeed do not conceive of it like that. In my opinion, genius is a notion about preserving values. I only consider those who realize socially useful actions to be geniuses. So genius is a unification of quantity and quality. But if this is true, why does the word genius worry many people currently? One could discuss this for a long time. Jacques Part2 writes, "A new truth inevitably sounds like insanity. The greater the truth, the greater the insanity." People do not easily tolerate what diverges from the average. The more someone differs from a typical average person, the less people tolerate them. This is characteristic not only of lay people, but also specialists. Even among scientists we find examples of this. Even Einstein was not understood by his colleagues. There were physicists in German universities who declared the theory of relativity a dead end. It is not public opinion alone that carps at my daughters. Even specialists and fellow game players often attack them. So the life of a genius is not easy. André Malraux says, "Talent is not a well-made foundation. Talent is a plague of nature, a trap for the character, a curse, a crossing of a burning, falling bridge, a burden around the neck, and a sprint up a mountain." As you see it, should the life of a genius be considered a blessing or a curse? And how would they themselves judge their lives? Some of them, a very small part, consider their state to be a curse, others able sig. Most feel joy fountaining from structured creativity, the experience of beauty and success. This is a state of blessing. But the life of a genius can be weighed down almost like a curse if they do not achieve their established goals. Their disillusionment can become great depending on the demands they place on themselves. Much can also depend on their sense of realism and their self-development. The true curse, however, comes from the outside. It causes enormous damage if one evaluates poorly what a genius does, if one does not judge them by their merits, if they do not receive moral and material support for their work. Also, humorited criticism can be terrible. All this makes the lives of geniuses much less easy. Jerusalem determined that today the situation is in many ways less favorable than in the Middle Ages, since by means of the rich capability of mass media a single demagogue can poison the thinking of the public in a few months, and drive the mob into savage fury against the most outstanding representative of the national culture. This brings a new question: is genius a treasure or a burden? In every way, singularly and objectively, a treasure. In our time, when international contacts are rapidly developing, the interchange of material and spiritual creations between the various populations is accelerating, and international competition in the economic, scientific, technological, cultural and athletic areas is similarly intensifying. Geniuses always play more important roles. It is in no way immaterial how many geniuses live in any country. Raising geniuses is one of the preconditions for social progress, and any society can be guided out of economic difficulty for the most part only by education and instruction. Professor Hans Isek, one of the most outstanding of those who plead for raising geniuses, asserts that international evolution will be very retarded without an artificial spiritual elite. The inventions and ideas of the above-average talented create pride in the whole society, and their patents establish new industrial branches, and thus new work opportunities. It is not by chance that, recognizing this, the directors of the largest international corporations support pioneering the education of geniuses, and among the patrons of the Doma Institute mentioned above are both the US Steel Corporation and the Japanese Sony. If so, then why does it happen that geniuses are often find themselves in disadvantageous situations? It is a different matter that the environment does not always treat geniuses favorably. But of course we should not only blame society. Understand well, it is not easy to make average people inclined to accept geniuses. Even in school, talented children are often excluded from their classmates. Teachers do not succeed in making the class like the talented student. Many times even the teacher does not recognize the talent, and even hinders its development. In adulthood this can happen more explicitly. Doesn't this have to do with geniuses being nonconformists and too sensitive, so they take a more sharply critical attitude? This is not certain. It is not certain that they have a greater sense of criticism in every direction. A genius has a truly different way of thinking than an average person, but they do not always reveal this in interpersonal relations. That is, a genius often offends no one. On the contrary, usually people offend them. It is not their conduct that evokes offense, but their achievements. Why would a genius painter, a genius musician, a genius chess player, offend people? Because they are outstanding in their specialty. Maybe because they break the mod. Other thinking in itself does not equal offense. At worst this merely troubles or irritates people. If this is the case, then geniuses should accept this and form their personalities in accordance with this. I agree. I do not want to claim that no genius has a malformed personality. They can have, and thus must take great care not to become so. One should establish multifaceted development of their personality and the formation of humanistic qualities as a goal for them. They themselves should contribute to this, that is, their self-education should work in this direction. I always very much tried to evolve in my children a positive human existence. This of course is useful also in their work, in the continual realizatio of greater achievements. There are outstanding chess masters who have malformed personalities. Florian Tibor, an international grandmaster and master teacher, who knows the Polgar sisters and many other young chess players, said, "It is wonderful how psychologically healthy these children are. Even extraordinary achievements have not marred them, unlike their colleagues, whose character's success has distorted more than once." In order for the relationship between society and geniuses stay relatively healthy, both sides must work in this direction. but society must act first. I agree with Jerusalem, who wrote, "Science flowers only if it is rooted in a society that respects knowledge." Many people of science have in the past forsaken their homelands to find a more suitable atmosphere. Think for example of the Hungarians. I generally accept the ethical standpoint that if two sides are debating, the stronger, more numerous side always bears more responsibility. Nevertheless, as much as the minority, the geniuses, are not allowed to do anything, it is not possible to liberate them from the duty of tolerance. They also must possess moral qualities enabling healthy contacts with society. This is true. Geniuses should not be as capricious as movie starlets. They should not consider themselves gods and others simpletons. This very easily leads to devaluing others and neglecting the work of others. Geniuses should not be puffed up, or self-aggrandizing, or avaricious. They should not want to rule. Moreover, geniuses do not want to be directed even by geniuses. Naturally, society needs to be guided by geniuses. Geniuses should become accustomed to the idea that they should serve and, if necessary, direct in science or in other useful fields. I agree with this, and this makes more evident the duty of society to consider geniuses as treasures, not burdens. I would add, consider them benchmarks. We should treat them as standards worthy of attainment. The kind of value system a society has is not irrelevant, whether it establishes a goal to provide everyone a summer cabin, or luxury goods, etc. Or if it considers creativity a value and is oriented to quality and eminence. If it ranks true human achievements highly, it will increase the rank of work. The nurture and care of talent, the appropriate evaluation of genius, is thus one of the conditions for the progress of society. That society will attain a higher level, which will make it more perfectly effective. The call to raise geniuses does not only mean a pedagogical task. It should also become a social goal. Everything that we see realized in this world is nothing more than the external result, the practical realizatio, the embodiment of thoughts that lived in eminent people throughout the world. The soul of the full story of the world is, we may assert, their history. Writes T. Carlyle, the Scots-English historian and historian of literature. For should children be made outstanding? The greatest of all miracles is that actual miracles can be natural, indeed, they must be. G. Lessing. Do not let the sun set without doing something. Latin proverb. We must believe that we are talented in some area, and that we must absolutely attain it. M. Curie. I imagine a family that waits with unbounded joy for their first child, nurtures them with unending love, and can set them on the unknown road to genius, that could also lead to failure. In Hungary there truly does not exist experience related to this, but we do have critical knowledge of how joy-destroying contemporary schools are. But from our reading we know that many eminent individuals in a framework of family pedagogy, as private learners. Naturally, I never considered this way to be the only appropriate one. Time and again I emphasize that I am a partisan of pedagogical pluralism. I do not reproach parents or teachers who do not travel my road, more or less good, but I do not reject pedagogical experiments that are different from mine, and I do not wish to explosively change the entire Hungarian school system. I believe in pedagogical variety, my own method of course included. However, you are now publishing your experiment, known in detail only to a circle of friends, and the basic principles of your pedagogical system, and thus you are handing it over to the international specialist public. Yes, because my family pedagogical experiment has reached a stage when the road traveled up to now can be generalized to a theory, and the results prove the correctness of my ideas. And on the other hand, the specialist world is at least turning to us with curiosity. I think that those who are trying to introduce various reforms into the framework of the current schools, and are experimenting with so-called gifted education to nurture the talented are on the right path. But this path, although better than the former one, is not enough. In my opinion, we can now transition to the organized instruction, with intentional and institutional frameworks, of truly unusually capable children, whom I call geniuses. Because in this area there has not been much done to pass on my experiences, I am first aiming at this field. In what form do you foresee the education of geniuses? I consider two forms of organized genius education realizable, with several variations. One of them is the family pedagogical, or in other words, home-schooled form. One can work in this way with one's own or adopted children, or both. In the latter case, several families can even work together to complete the educational cycle for children in other families. The other form is the specialized genius educating school. One variant could be a boarding school, where children live continuously. The other, a boarding school in a family context. Family pedagogy, in other words, a system of homeschooling, is quite ancient in history. When I was exploring this problem and collecting materials, I encountered a great many cases of this. I give only a few examples. In a book about the Medela family, one can read that without his father, the son Felix Medela could never have become what he did. His father felt that he would not have fulfilled his filial duty even if he had hired the most eminent teachers for his son. His educational method was extraordinarily rigorous. His basic principle sounded like this. Every achievement represented only one step in one's evolution, every good thing could become even better. The message of his pedagogy is that the education of a child is never finished, and parents, while they live, should never stop counseling and directing their children. About Yehudi Muhi I read that for his parents, the birth of a son and the development of his talent meant that it was self-evidently natural that their lives would be subordinate to the career of their son. His father left his well-developing pedagogical career in 1928 so that the family could live together and he could organize Yehudi's concerts. It seems to me that this situation was almost perfectly repeated with you 10 years ago. You and your wife left your teaching positions. I did not mention by accident that I had studied the specialist literature and found myself under its influence before the birth of my daughters. Even independent of this, I represented the standpoint that one should strengthen the role of the family in society and promote its activity in the sphere of education. One should not hand over all its functions to the schools. Moreover, if a mature, educationally capable family were found prepared to make the effort, one should promote and support this kind of family pedagogy, working with either one's own or adopted children. Namely, the family creates and maintains the first field of activity for a child. Family members become the first models for a child. A child's concept of identity, self-awareness, is delineated within the framework of the family. The evolution of exceptionally capable children is greatly favored if the ambition of the parents is directed towards raising them as outstanding people. In all those cases when we encounter a very early revelation of exceptional capability, we are able to determine that either the parents or other people, most often teachers or tutors, made an effort to directly develop these capabilities. According to the renowned German pedagogue Hermann Oak, the basis for education of exceptionally capable children is the passion of the mature person in relation to the developing person in favor of the latter. At the start, the relationship is so intimate that the soul is determined to imitate the model and complete the tasks. In addition, the soul is very important. The anecdote about Socrates is well known. When once the master sent back to his father Iouth, who had been registered to study with him. Asked why he did this, Socrates answered, "Because he did not love me enough." If I understand your thinking well, the starting task for education does not consist of parents uncovering talents that are hidden in children like an underground stream, but that they direct and orient them by means of good methods towards the chosen specialty. Yes, according to my principle, one should not try to find talents, but choose an appropriate pedagogical method for developing the talents. The first characteristic of genius education, I could say the most important novelty distinguishing it from contemporary instruction and its necessary precondition, is early specializatio directed at one concrete field. It is indeed true what Homer said, a person cannot be experienced or first in everything. Because of this, parents should choose a specific field at their discretion. It is only important that by the age of 3 to 4 some physical or mental field should be chosen, and the child can set out on their voyage. How would you summarize the essence of specialized education? Intensive instruction in the chosen field of specialized activity. My daughters, for example, arrived at the field of chess, which means that starting from 4 to 5 they played chess 5 or 6 hours a day. What other fields can one also choose, in your opinion? Anything. If someone wants to become a musician, they should spend 5 or 6 hours doing music. If physics, then doing physics. If linguistics, then with languages. In conditions of intensive instruction, a child will soon feel knowledgeable, perceive independence, achieve success, and shortly become capable of independently applying their knowledge. Let us take an example from language learning. Let us suppose that someone visits a class for interpreters at a school for geniuses, where they are occupied for 5 to 6 hours with a first foreign language, Esperanto if possible. Why precisely with this language I will clarify below. After some months they are already corresponding with children in other countries. They participate in meetings in and outside of their country and longer lasting where they experience serious successes, and they converse fluently in the language they have learned by then. Is this ace feeling for a child? Yes, it is nice. Is it useful for the child? Yes, it is useful. Is it useful for society? It is useful. In the following year one can do the same with another foreign language, let us say English, and in the year after that another. The same is valid for any field of life. In this way a child really enjoys what they are doing, and they see that it makes sense. In contemporary schools students do not understand why they are learning. But in genius education schools the children know that after a few months they will speak Esperanto, in the following year English, in the following year German, etc. Or in the field of chess, in the first year they play at level 3, after the third year at level 1, after 5 years as a master candidate, after 6 to 7 years as a master, after 8 to 10 years as an international master, and after the 15th year as a grandmaster. So the child sees the goal and meaning of their work. Of course, the necessary condition here is that the pedagogue is intensively occupied with the child. In genius education it is necessary that the pedagogue, whether the parents or professional teachers or tutors, stay in direct, constant and intensive contact with the child. Because of this we imagine groups of only 10 to 15 members. In practice an intensive collaborative contact between the child and an adult must be formed, in which the child does not feel subordinate. Think how advantageous it would be if the child already understands at the age of 10 that they know a great deal, that they are a person of the same value as an adult, and that in their life there is at least one field they master as well or better than adults. So do children have an advantageous position in genius education? Yes. According to the American social psychologist Kurt Lewey, one can observe a causal feedback loop between capabilities and the environment. For talented children not a few advantages originate in those specially favorable conditions in the surroundings, that they themselves fight out of for their future. For example, if some patron covers the costs of instruction, travel, or purchase of specialist literature, To this are added psychological advantages. There are people who think that by specializing early you are promoting some kind of narrow specialist barbarism. Totally not. Psychology and pedagogy are both familiar with the phenomenon of transfer. The formation of capabilities in any field has such a general value that it easily makes a person suitable to assimilate other areas. Transfer means that children learn how to learn, they assimilate the capability to learn. Specializatio, of course, is only relative, being multifaceted generally accompanies it. If, for example, one prepares for computer programming, they must learn mathematics, computing, foreign languages, and as well they will certainly travel the world, encounter eminent people in the public sphere, do sports, do cultural activities, etc. How is this narrow? Zsuzar speaks 7 or 8 foreign languages, travels overseas, writes articles and books, analyzes chess matches, plays table tennis, swims, etc. Moreover, one should interpret development in one direction correctly. Although being directed in one direction means going both deeper and higher, it does not, however, cause the whole personality to become single-faceted. It is true that genius education makes a child specialize in one field, but this does not mean abandoning all other fields. A single direction is not the same as being single-faceted, and vice versa. Multidirectionality does not in itself equal being multifaceted. Single-directionality kakumi with big multifaceted, while multidirectionality can also mean being zero-faceted, or mere hypocrisy behind which hides a lack of knowledge. Multidirectionality can also mean being competent at no speciality at all, or snobbish competency. As Seneca says, who is everywhere is nowhere. One can easily be convinced that my system brings people closer to being as multifaceted as possible than current schools, which lead mostly to grey mediocrity. Thus the specializatio you promote contains the basic multifacetedness of our times, the complexity of personality. Yes. One should link genius education to the complex education of the personality, and within this the formation of emotional and moral values. In genius education this task is as important as early specializatio. While contemporary schools cannot fulfill their task of education for the greater number of students and subjects, while for them education is merely a slogan, for genius education the formation of a complex personality is a valid requirement, a basic precondition. The reason for this, among others, is that the working relationship between pedagogue and student is very intimate. This closeness is itself spontaneously educational, but it is completed by a goal-conscious planned program. One should prepare oneself for educating children as consciously as for specialist instruction. This is probably an even more difficult field. Yes, and in this field pedagogical tradition is poorer, and the task itself is unmeasurably more complex. There is no more complex, multifaceted entity than the human personality. Among the goals of education I and my wife consider of first importance the formation of the following traits: belief, courage, strength, persistence, enthusiasm, the objective evaluation of persons and objects, standing up to failure and also the temptations of success. Insistent striving for goals, patience, inventiveness, tolerance of criticism even if false, being able to let go of stresses, enduring conflicts, a high level of tolerance for frustration, discipline, planning, the need for challenging work, establishing realistic goals. Conscious management of rest, freedom from conventions, searching for new paths, keeping oneself in an appropriate state of humor, good humor, calm and aggressive at the same time. In addition, we also aim for these kinds of values, world views and moral standards, like the love of siblings, parents and teachers, respect for elders and the aged, realistic evaluation of peers and adults, and that children not prefer the pleasure of physical life. The symbols of the social status of creative work, etc. Linked with this, I also want to speak about positive vanity. We told our daughters that they should work diligently, because they could thus become capable of great achievements. We made them aware that there could only be one world champion at a time, so they should establish a goal to become good chess players, sportsmen like honest people. They should be aware of their capabilities and fight for what belonged to them, never hurt other people. Unfortunately, they have received enough blows and hurts from life to understand this. They should have self-respect, know their own capabilities, but they should not desire to be stars. An important function of genius education is instilling the capability for self-education. It starts with establishing in the child independent interests. Little by little we can instill in them self-education, independence, and creative work. The pedagogical co-worker cannot always stay at their side. So one of the most important educational tasks is to teach self-education. The latter contributes to, among other things, the child liking what they do, and in their life work is not separate from hobbies. What, in your opinion, should be the relationship between children and their peer group? The contemporary psychological and pedagogical literature emphasizes in one sense the importance of the peer group. But in my pedagogical concept it receives a slightly different emphasis. According to me, it is not primarily important for a child to have suitable companions of the same age, but preferably to have spiritually, mentally, appropriate partners, friends worthy of the level of their intellectual capabilities. If the social relationships of a child are exclusively or for the most part limited to groups of the same age, this will slow the progress of an exceptionally capable child. One often requires that children not stay too long among adults. This is disadvantageous only if the intellectual level is too different, and if the relationship between child and adult is not suitable. For example, if the adult imposes everything on the child so they take away their independence and initiative. But if they try to correctly develop these traits in the child, it is not damaging, but on the contrary is useful. About this I do not want to say that a child should always be in the company of adults. One must find the right proportion of being with adults and peers. I believe that passing their time in the company of those who have a similar level of intellect and similar interests and sense this well in these interactions is decisive. Z. Suzar is a Karkati example. If at the age of 13 she had played chess only with 13-year-olds, who were weaker than her in many categories, this would have been less than useful for her. And for her opponents it would not have been nice to be knocked out in every match. Z. Suzar herself would not have profited, because she needed playing partners at a similar level, and those were found only among adults. However, this was not a cause for concern, as the age difference itself did not prevent friendly relationships with others, and having good friends and colleagues at the same time. And friendship often flowed from work relationships. Thus one's work is at the same time a hobby. You raised all three of your daughters to be chess geniuses. Why? Were they inclined in that direction, or did you guide them in that direction? As I said, intellectual capability is in principle educable in any direction. By appropriate methods a genius can be formed in any field. From the viewpoint of the pedagogical experiment it would obviously be a stronger hand if I had raised them in three different fields, mathematics, chess, and music, for example, declared beforehand. This would certainly have been successful. But my financial situation then and my free time did not permit this. If the three children had needed 3 instructor tutors, we would have had to go with them to 3 different places. We would have had to buy a piano, and books about music, chess and mathematics, etc. So in our system, learning was more easily solvable as the children formed one team, and what is most important, the family could be together more. I attribute a central role to the family, and I enjoy it very much if the family is together a great deal. Is it not disadvantageous that all 3 children specialized in the same field? The disadvantages are almost trivial beside the advantages. It is true that some psychologists do not promote this way, thinking that the children will jealous, envious, later even hostile. But this does not occur with correct education. Can you describe how you imagine a day in Genius School? Probably thus. -4 hours of specialist study, for us, chess. -1 hour of a foreign language. Esperanto in the first year, English in the second, and another chosen at will in the third. At the stage of beginning, that is, intensive language instruction, it is necessary to increase the study hours to 3 in place of the specialist study for 3 months. In summer, study trips to other countries. -1 hour of general study, native language, natural science and social studies. -1 hour of computing. -1 hour of moral, psychological, and pedagogical studies, humor lessons as well, with 20 minutes every hour for joke telling. -1 hour of gymnastics, freely chosen, which can be accomplished individually outside school. The division of study hours can of course be treated elastically. Would you accept a job in a genius educating school like this? If you are asking if I believe in its success, then yes. But if I were to endeavor to do something like this in practice, that would depend on the conditions, whether I received sufficient social support. It is not only for this that I have been wearied by the many battles up to now, but also because it is very important for pedagogical participants in genius education to have tranquility and trust. Without this the work will not progress. If one must endlessly dispute with the press, with various authorities and poseurs incapable of acting pedagogues and psychologists, defend oneself against them, this damages the work. For me a single battle like this is sufficient. On the other hand, I will still have to concentrate for several years on the further development of my daughters. You have done pioneering work, with its risks and burdens. You have taken on not only a pioneering war, but a guerrilla war. Maybe. Despite this, I think that the method of genius education I sketch is not too complicated a structure. So one should not fear it as much as people do now, however fearsome it seems now. 5. Esperanto, the first stage of foreign language learning. Over all the earth there was one language and one speech. Genesis 11. 100 of the grandest ideas would not make as great and beneficial a revolution in the lives of humanity as the introduction of an international language will. L.L. Zamenhof. No privilege for any nation, or any language. V.I. Leahy. Before further presenting your pedagogical system, permit me to digress a little. I know that your whole family speaks Esperanto. Did you choose this at random? Or does this function as an aid to chess playing? A necessary part of your pedagogical system? All of these. But you have not mentioned the most important. Esperanto is for me a humanistic value, which besides being a weapon against racial, tribal and national discrimination, also plays a role as a remedy for linguistic inequality. It has been made to be one of the possible ways to fight for equality and equal rights of the population. But if it is so obvious, why has this language not spread more widely? The reason is besides prejudice principally economic. Humanity must fight for a long time for every progressive idea. The need to emancipate women is obvious, just as is the necessity to achieve racial equality, despite neither of these being easily effected. For me, genius education is also completely self-evident, but many people nevertheless hold prejudices about it. The same is true of Esperanto. A part of people well feels in circumstances of divine wrath. The confusion of Babel means a pleasant living environment for them. There are also those who by intense labor learn 2 to 3-4 foreign languages and unwillingly give up their acquired position. On another plane, the economically and politically dominant nations also want to dominate linguistically in current circumstances. This relates to English and obviously would not vote for Esperanto. A monopoly on one or another historical national language means at the same time discrimination against peoples and languages. In contrast, a neutral language, linked to no nation, would manifest the linguistic equality of the peoples. Because of this I consider it a humanistic battle to endeavor to introduce Esperanto. In my concept the languages of every nation are of equal value from the viewpoint of quality, so there should not be a hierarchy of languages among them. Do you think that historical languages will disappear more or less soon? No. I think just the opposite. If the languages of every nation are of equal value, then everyone can use their own for their first language. But as a card language, a complement, there should be an independent neutral language that can act as a bridge between the various nations. Human speech needs two languages, says the eminent Hungarian author Frigyes Karithí. One for nation, family, art, and self-expression, and one to serve the community, humanity, the world, and communication. Everyone accepts that there needs to be one or more common languages. But why should this be an artificial language, Esperanto? Why not English, Russian or Chinese? English is undoubtedly the most internationally widespread language, and I recommend that everyone learn it. Next Esperanto. Today this would be natural. Because in most countries English is spoken only by a narrow stratum of people, and generally imperfectly even by them. Its study requires a great deal of time and energy, so it can hardly become a world language for a great number, for the simple uneducated masses. It presents an unacceptable disadvantage for those who live outside of English-speaking regions, and it would overshadow non-English-speaking cultures. Why Esperanto should rightly be chosen as a world language is easy to prove theoretically. From a